Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for attending. It's my great pleasure to introduce the 2025 Yorkshire Butterfly Review. I've called it an Annus Mirablis, or Miracle of a Year. Or is it, like a lot of people think, just an average year? So one of the big objectives of this talk is just to delve into that. Why do different people have different impressions of what to a good many people was an Annus Mirablis? It's very rare that you see butterflies in clouds of hundreds in your local fields, which is what I experience almost every day throughout July. Walking the dog every day, it was just literally hundreds, and usually mostly whites. 2025, it had the warmest and the driest spring and summer in a century. But what would happen after the disastrous cool spring and the dull summer of 2024? We're going to delve into that some more. Then, of course, there was the drought. How did that affect things? So here we go. We always like to start with some news articles, so I picked out some, I think, some really interesting, stimulating news articles from the press. And I chose this one because it's just totally amazing. It blew me away when I looked at it. It's the Xerces Society is tracking monarch migration via crowdsourcing everybody, that's you and me's phones. And you see here the monarch butterfly, and you see attached to its abdomen this little radio transmitter, and this is the aerial, which is straight down its down the abdomen. And this is a close-up, shows you a solar, it actually has a solar cell, a little tiny battery, and the Blu-ray radio. You may have heard of Blu-ray because it's in all our phones. And what happens, how it works, the crowdsourcing part is, as the butterfly gets within a few meters, usually within 10 meters or so, of a mobile phone, that mobile phone picks up the signal and relays it to your service provider, who then relay it on to Xerces. You don't really have any say in this. It's just totally automatic process. And so they've been able to plot the track of, over here on the right-hand side, the actual autumn migration of a number that they tagged, I think, 200 monarch butterflies, and it shows you the different tracks. And the dots is where they've picked up where the butterfly is going. But this map on the other side here is actually what happened this spring up to a few days ago. It's the story of flight MW005. It's 1,500 miles, which it managed to do in 15 days. So yes, never underestimate what a butterfly can do. And you can see it here. This is the Gulf of America, or is it actually Gulf of Mexico? I should call it correctly. And it came up from the overwintering grounds, which are just to the west of Mexico City, and crossed the Rio Grande in March the 14th, and then reached, this is Memphis, Tennessee, on March the 21st. I don't have any recent update, but that's its journey. I just found that just totally amazing what we can do. The big butterfly count, of course, has been in the news because we all thought it was quite a good summer. But then Dr. Richard Fox, the head of science and butterflies conservation, warned we may feel like we've seen lots of butterflies this summer, but that's only because last year was just so awful. Is that true? If you look at the figures in a bit more depth, actually, 6 of the species in the survey had their best year ever. That includes the small copper, large white, small white, brimstone, gatekeeper, comma. Remember those names because we're going to meet them again later. Red Admiral had his second best year ever. Food for thought. There's another new thing coming in with butterfly conservation next month. So this is their launching Britain's favourite butterfly. It runs from 15th of May to the 7th of June. I do see a little snag there because we go into the June drop, and of course it is the late spring butterflies. There won't be massive numbers, but at least it's a different time of the year. Now we have some new species appearing, and here are 3. Is the purple emperor now a Yorkshire resident? We have a new species appear just here, a new white species. We're going to cover all these species in some detail at the end of my talk. I think it's quite interesting what's happening this year. So as you know, I'm the transect coordinator, and this is the huge amount of data that we create each year. It's now nearly 50% of all the records that we produce are from transects. So we have 116 UK BMS transects. Now these are transects which are walked every week by very, how can we say, hard-working volunteers. We also do single species transects. So this is like the northern brown argus, and we also do one for the purple hairstreak. Of the ones we had this year, 18 were new or restarted old ones. We do get quite a few old ones that have lapsed, which have lots of data, and it's good to get them back up to date by having a restart. Unfortunately, every year we do lose a few. We're always looking for new walkers. If anybody's interested, please get in contact. The overall thing that we've managed to achieve this last year is now we've moved up the league table, so we're equal fourth with what I thought was the home of butterflies, which is Dorset. So that is quite an achievement, and we should be rightly proud. This all takes huge amounts of manpower, as you can imagine, because each of these transects may have 2 or 3 walkers on a rota, which is the norm. So it's not surprising you got 2.5 times as many volunteers to man them all. And each year we need more and more. They have to be trained, which is also my job. But the work that they do, this is the number of walks, 1,700 transects walks that they do. They're covering 4,000 kilometers, which is equivalent of 3,000 hours of work. It's the largest intensive monitoring system of any invertebrate in the world is here at our foot, literally in the UK. This is how we've developed over the years. So we started at quite a low level. We were late starters compared with most of the UK, which started in the 70s, in 1976 to be exact. Which, if you might remember, it was a cracking butterfly year. It was a good year to start. We did have some work going on in the 90s, but really things really began to take off after the millennium, and it's grown. I especially like to thank Yorkshire Wildlife because they contribute a huge amount of volunteers. Some of those 240 volunteers are actually Yorkshire Wildlife volunteers, which is why each year we do a joint session between Yorkshire Wildlife and ourselves, a special session just for our transect recorders, which they appreciate. So yeah, this last year we had a lot of transects, but unfortunately because of the weather, we have to be able to walk, we have to hit flight conditions, which are onerous to say the least. So like today was probably one of the first days we could walk. There've been a couple of other days where we've hit flight conditions, but today was definitely one of the first. Tomorrow will be another good day for hitting flight conditions, and that is 13 degrees centigrade, and it has to be sunny and not too windy. Between the hours of 10:45 and 3:45 or thereabouts. It is difficult. Some Aprils you may only get 2 or 3 occasions. So it's a tough job, but the amount of data, good quality data that we get from it is very different from our casual recording. We go somewhere, you see something, you note down maybe a number that you've seen. That's called a casual record. This is our transects are systematic work which stands up to scientific rigor, and it means all the data that we produce is you can compare one with the other. You can compare this year with last year, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, which is hugely powerful. Our data is used by scientists throughout the world. This is where they are, because the other objective is to get as much coverage of Yorkshire as we possibly can. So let me introduce you to the landscapes. These are all in different colours. This is the natural England landscapes. Probably the first one I'll pick out would be this one here, which is very, very important, which is Ingleborough, of which there's about 7 transects on Ingleborough. Some are on the south side, a good many are on the north side, including the ones on the limestone pavement. Another important site, probably the second most, is Helmsley and the Duke of Burgundy butterfly, which lives there. They're this light green colour because each of these is coded by colour according to the habitat. And the target's to get 7 transects for each landscape so we can actually see the effect of different landscapes on our species. That has to be probably one of the most important criteria, other than weather, of course, which bounces up and down. The other important site in the Craven Limestones is the Grassington area, where we have the Northern Brown Argus, Bastow Woods, and then next on the line is this thing here. It's a long, skinny landscape. This is the magnesium limestone ridge. It has a large number of transects because there are some exceptionally good sites along them. And they generally occur where the big rivers of Yorkshire burst through this ridge, which actually follows the line of the A1. The Romans knew what they were doing, keep their feet dry. But where those rivers burst through, you get obviously a steep sloping gorge where you get excellent woodlands, but also at the bottom you tend to get really good calcareous grasslands. And one of the most important ones there, I would say, is Brockendale. But there's some excellent woodlands around. Next important probably is the wolds, where we're short because there's not the population. The reason for these big gaps tends to be lack of volunteers to get them to get the coverage. So Wolds is very lightly populated. Even so, we managed to get Fodden, Warren Quarry, Kipling Coates, and this year Rifle Butts Quarry next door has joined. But we always need more. Oh, we have another new one at Newburnholm. So this is constantly changing. This map is not quite up to date. If you want to know more about our transects, if you go to the website, go to transect reports, you can see a report on each and every one of these sites, which I write every year, reviewing how it's doing and what's happening. In other words, we're trying to assist the management of those sites in conservation. They seem to be very receptive to our work. But butterfly of the year, we always have a butterfly of the year, and this one is the small copper on fleabane. It loves fleabane. And the reason I chose it was very simple, is it had its worst ever year last year, increased by 30-fold, not 10-fold, 30-fold, for this year being its highest ever recorded level. Quite amazing. So, what happened in 2025? In very brief. So in Yorkshire, 7 species had the best year ever out of the last 20, and 10 more had the second best year out of the last 20. However, if you look at the UK, there's a very big north-south split. So when you read Richard Fox's, well, it's only average, you have to consider that the South had a much worse year than we did because they had less rain. Scotland had its best year ever for butterflies, while Northern England had its best year in the last 20. The South was about average. That's the conclusion. Even so, um, I think 60% species were above, whilst 30% were below the 10-year average. Some of the browns really suffered, while the Lycinids did really well. And this is going to be very much the talking point of this presentation, is how the different species did. But I'm going to take you back now to history. Now, this is a horrible looking graph. Don't worry about it. I'll talk you through it. But as you know, we're in a warming period. But there's just as many cooling periods as been warming period. And this kind of breaks it down. Now, this is looking at summer, this is not the average that climate science might use. I'm using the summer temperatures when butterflies are actually active and breeding, because really, from an insect's point of view, you stop work at 10 degrees centigrade and you go to sleep. And really, those temperatures below that really don't matter. It's all to do with activity. So this red line really reflects the average summer temperatures from 1885. Big dip at the beginning, and we think that was largely responsible for Krakatoa. It was an enormous eruption which spewed a lot of dust into the upper atmosphere, which took 4 or 5 years to really come out. So it's quite likely some of these dips that we have are due to short-term volcanic activity, as well as the longer-term effects of Milankovitch cycle, where Jupiter basically alters our orbit. But I'm not going to go there because then we get into ice ages. The thing to remember is if you look at Yorkshire over a period of hundreds of thousands a year, then most of the time above our heads is about a mile of ice. And at present time is unusual in that it's an interglacial period, which is obviously warmer. But there's lots of ups and downs within those interglacials. So, for example, directly as 20,000 years ago, there was a bit of a peak, and then it cooled, and then you had the Roman period when it was warm enough to grow vines and many other crops in the UK. But that was followed by the cool period of the Middle Ages. And the reason I'm showing this is you'll be very, very interested because not many of counties actually experience what Yorkshire experiences, for the simple fact that Yorkshire is on the line between the north and the south. So what this chart shows is how the species have returned, because after that big eruption and the following cool periods, of which there were several, there was short-term return of species, but long-term decline in number of species till we hit somewhere near a minimum in around about 1963. There's a few species came back before that, but very few, as you can see at the top. 1911, small copper, 1932, peacock. But then something very special happened around about 1983, 1984, which corresponded with the publication of the first Yorkshire Butterflies book. We actually looked at what happened in the subsequent years, because suddenly, as you can see here, 1983, brimstone, gatekeeper, ringlet, purple hairstreak, and other species began to reappear and become established. Now, these dates are not exactly the first specimen was seen. This is actually when the abundance when they began to spread out quickly and spread through the county. So you begin to see a lot of the species we think are totally familiar are actually quite recent in returning. Since the millennium, we've actually had another 4 species. Scotch Argus, which you could argue was an introduction, but it's naturalized really well and is now spreading. Silverwash Viterli, which it continues to spread, even touching into Scotland. The Purple Emperor, we had our first one in 2022. And this year, the new one is Southern Small White. So up until the Industrial Revolution, Yorkshire had a very similar number of common species to the present day, but these really decreased after Krakatoa to about their minimum in 63, as I said. The critical temperature where it seems to trigger the increase is in here. So round about here, 18.5 degrees is the point where it begins to go up. And that's when the species begin to return. It's an interesting overview, I think, of what's happening to our species. Another little fact to take home is we're getting one new species every 4 years since 1984. In our gardens, there are now twice as many common species. Brimstone, gatekeeper, holly blue. Yeah, to name a few. Let's look at the weather, because this is always a critical. Weather probably produces more noise than anything else, because every year is so very different and the insect is so receptive. But I've never seen a year like this one. It was a bumpy year. You couldn't be more opposite to 2024. I can't remember a year where there was flight conditions almost every day from March right through to the beginning of August. It was exceptional. This is the summer. All these red bits which are above the average line, which is the average line, and then you've got the various and the absolute. The limit is the red line, so this is the highest ever temperature recorded. We hit that in March last year. You may remember the beginning of March last year, we had a plume of warm air that stayed for nearly a week. Really fired up the year. It went cooler, and then it came back, and we hit another record, and then another record in the first few days of April, and then another record in May, and then very close to another record in the middle of May, and so it continues right through the summer. 22nd of June was another record day, 13th of July, and again almost a record, 10th of August. It was exceptional. Of course, the species begin to emerge earlier, 2 to 3 weeks earlier, and we managed to break lots of our earliest ever records. Out there on the transects, because the transect walkers really feel the change because they're counting numbers of insects. And we were getting near summertime numbers throughout April because of that warm March into April. And sometimes we're getting 100 plus insects. It was really amazing. This is the actual numbers for how much warmer each of the months were. I won't go through them. But the last time we ever had similar conditions to this would be 1976. And if you were old enough as me, you would know that was an incredibly warm year. It also began to affect other insects, aphids. By the end of March, there was aphids on our rose bushes, quickly followed by ladybirds. And I'm still evicting ladybirds from the house even today. The important thing to consider is June. June's our critical month for butterflies. 63% of all our butterflies reach their final instar. In other words, it's a big caterpillar, or it's turned into a pupa. A pupa can't fly, so therefore it's vulnerable to predation. And in itself, they're big meals for any hungry bird which is feeding its fledglings. June was nearly 3 degrees warmer, and then July 4 degrees warmer. It was amazing. We had lots of reports of migration of clouds of whites coming in off the sea, mostly whites, large white, small white. And June also saw the start of a severe drought. The ground cracked, hay crops failed, the sward, I'd never seen the sward quite as thin as that last year. It was incredibly and very short, but very luckily for most of us up here in the north, we had overnight rain in very early July, and the lawns regreened and the verges regreened. This did not happen in southern England. It continued to bake. 2025 is the third hottest year in a row, 2023 being hotter, 2024 in between, can you believe? Mostly because it was a record-breaking warm winter, not because of the summer. So this gives you the emergent state. You may have seen this. I'm responsible for producing the first sightings, and it's really, really quite interesting to look at this in some detail. You'll find this on the homepage of the website, and it basically gives you the date of the first sighting of each species, the 20-year average of that species, what it did the previous year, and the difference from this year to the 20-year average in terms of number of days. And you begin to see here the effects of weather. So ignore the hibernators because they're all over the place generally. But the small white was 2 weeks early. Specklewood 3 weeks. This is right at the beginning of March in that really hot spell. They almost reached a month early by the 9th of March. And then it dipped away as you saw the weather deteriorate and it dipped down. And then it began to come back in that hot spell in May, at the end of April, and it began to climb back up again to nearly a month early. It's amazing what happens. So this is the number of species which was on the wing at the end of April. And you can see over the years, it's been steadily increasing. So now this last year we hit 22. As a sideline, as we're here on the 6th of April. Last year we had 14 species. This year we have 12 species. I think that might change in the next few days because it's some good weather forecast. So we're pretty early, and people in the south are saying it's the earliest year ever. Well, we will see. I don't think it will be for us. So we had a record-breaking 22 species on the wing at the end of April. You can also express this graph in a different way. You can work out the emergent state as a day number, the year day number for all the species, and average them to give you your average spring emergent states, which is shown here. And as you can see, over the period, the average emergent state of our spring species has dropped significantly. It's nearly 12 days earlier over the last 20 years. And now another 5 species are now regularly seen up to the end of May. We actually had 30 species on the wing at the end of May, and that actually included, can you believe it, marble white and the silver wash fritillary at the end of May. That is completely crazy. So as you can imagine, it's should be related to temperature. And you can see every year it bounces up and down. So what if we replot that in a different way and actually plot it as emergence date? It's actually risen 0.7 degrees in those 20 years. If you now look at the emergence date, so this is earlier and that is later, and plot it against temperature, you see 2025 here. And that is actually 2011, which is here. It's highly significant as a trend line. And if you boil that down to what it means, for every 1 degree warmer over that period, i.e. March and April, species emerge a week earlier. So in this year, which was 2.6 degrees warmer, they are 3 weeks earlier, and that was certainly the case. The same is happening in autumn, but of course, we don't measure that, or currently, I haven't had the time to measure it. And as we stand today, we're just one species behind last year. So another early year this year. It just illustrates how incredibly sensitive the response of butterflies are to our warmer world. This is what a lot of people will want to know for this year. How did our species do? Well, there's some extremely good ones and there's a few bad ones. So this is the change in abundance compared with the average for the last 5 years. So it's a short-term change that we're looking at, not long-term, short-term. So for all the species, it was up just 30%. But as you can see here, there's a lot of species with huge amounts. In fact, over nearly 50% of our species were up 50% in abundance. However, the species that make a big difference are actually these species here. So it's the meadow brown and the ringlet, which are the big, numerically, they're the biggest population. So if their population changes, it has a dramatic effect on numbers. So you can pick out small copper. We'll see up here, way up. Green hair streak. It really loves the warm spring. The large white, which the migrants were responsible for a good deal of that. The purple hair streak had a cracking year. Green vein white came from its lowest ever to one of its best ever. The same as the small copper this last year. Brown Argus, which is very responsive to temperature, had a great year. Small white came as the migrants. Dingy skipper, a spring butterfly, benefited greatly. Peacock. But let's have a look at the other end. Small heath, it hates dry and it hates cold. Of course, it got the cold last year and it had the dry this year. It managed to recover a little bit, but it's still doing really, really, really poorly. Holly blue is at the dip of its cycle. You know it is on a 5 or 6 year cycle of up and down with its parasite. Presently, it's on the downside, so that explains that. Small tortoiseshell, it started really well. We were seeing them in February, and into March, I saw quite a few. While the previous year, I saw nothing in 2024. And there was quite a decent first generation, which emerged in early June, very early, and then we really didn't see anything much after that. Scotch Argus didn't do terribly well, and other species here. We'll come into a bit more detail of that, but I'm going to move on quickly. So the summary, overall numbers up 30%, and we're 90% up on last year. It's a huge bounce back from last year's terrible weather. Nearly half the species are up more than 50%. This is much more interesting. This is actually the spread of they've got all the different sites along the bottom. At this end, don't worry if you can't read them. I'll spell it, and it's not really important to be able to read them. And I'll just spell out what it means. Obviously, we got a huge extreme at both ends. We never had such a massive extreme of change in any other year than this last year. Some positive and some negative. And one to look at is this one. Warren Quarry did poorly this year. Well, last year it was the only transect that did better than the average. Why? Well, have a look along this red line. You'll begin to see things. Warren Quarry is a very dry site. It's just solid rock, pretty much. There's a little bit of soil, but not much. And then you've got Thrushfield, which is another quarry. Then you've got Malham Tarn, which is limestone pavements. Priory Fields, which is a sandy site in Hull. Ingleborough High Bray, that's limestone pavement. Pickup, which is in Fairburn Ings, and another dry site. St Aidan's Hillside, another dry site. Roach Hills, quite near me here at Selby, up on the top of the limestone ridge, is a dry site. Duck Street Quarry, which is solid rock. Fairburn Riverbank didn't do well. Another St Aidan site. None of the St Aidan sites did well at all. Let's go to the other end, see what we think. Fen Bog, which is wet, as you can imagine. Let's look down. So Crookside is actually at the bottom of the valley. It's Ingleborough, as is Sotherscales. East Park is in the middle of Hull. Helwath is on the side of the river. I can't remember which. In Ripon. Sprotbrough Flash is on the side of the River Don. Hipperley Beck, which is on the side of the river. Cally Heath, which is just outside York. Let's have a look down. Grass Wood. We start to get into more woodland sites. And we've got Bishop Wood, which was my transect, which is solid woodland. Brockadale, which is half woodland. And as you go down there, you get into hedgerows. What you're seeing is really the effect of drought. In other words, if you're near a river or you've got deep mineral soils, you actually had a really super season. If you had a little bit of shade or hedgerows on mineral soils, you had a cracking season. So it's a strong pattern of drought interacting with soil type, especially thin limestone and sandy soils. It's very much the opposite of a disastrous wet year like last year. And for that reason, Warren Quarry has gone from top last year to bottom this year. So huge difference between drought with soil type. A large number of our damp grasslands, hedgerows and woodlands really benefited. This lot here, you'll find, is woodlands. This is more river and this is woodlands. A very small number of the chalk site actually did worse than last year, which is amazing. In such a good year that a site could do worse than last year, that's difficult to believe, but it happened. Warren Quarry. This is another little interesting one. There's a lot in here, and I'll walk you through it very steadily because it tells you a lot about the longer term. We looked now at the shorter term, but we're now looking at the longer term. Here, the blue line goes up and down, is temperature. So again, we're looking at the average summer temperature, and it's actually got the degrees centigrade. As you can see, this year was the warmest, 23 was the next warmest, and then 2018, followed by 2007, 6, 2003, and then back to the 90s. The green line is the abundance on a different scale. So the scale of temperature is 2 degrees, but the scale of the abundance is about a factor of 5. And you can see the abundance reacts hugely to temperature, and it follows the line near enough. It's not always accurate. Sometimes it's a year out, but it roughly follows the blue line. I think you agree. The red dotted is sunshine. That just follows the temperature. What can we get from that? So as we were saying, some temperatures have risen 0.7 degrees, but abundance has increased 27 degrees. And as you can see, it follows the temperature. At the same time, rainfall's increased 27%, more rainy days, but they're more intense rainy days. Sunshine has barely changed, just a little bit. I suppose the most important thing is we've had three droughts in 4 years, and that is having quite a strain on some of our species. Best years? Well, we've covered some of them in my list, but let's just look at the worst years. So let's have a look at 2009. There's our worst year. 1998. There's our worst year. 2012, which in the UK, 2012 was one of the very worst years ever. Not quite so bad in Yorkshire, but pretty similar. We're going to meet these dates a little bit further on. The other thing to remember with this abundance increase is all the time we've got more species coming into Yorkshire. So over this period, 1990 onwards, we've got 6 new species have appeared. So they also contribute to increasing numbers. So there's two things that's happening. I'm going to just move now, and I'm going to go quickly through the species very quickly. Brimstone is one of those species that's really benefiting. It really is a big climate change winner. It's up 275% in 20 years. We've had a run of 4 years of record breakers, these last 4 years. It's amazing, really. It's still moving up, moving north, and it's also moving up in altitude. So the occupancies continue to increase. Large white, it was in the doldrums still this year, and that this year has really pushed it up 150% over this period. It did lose a lot during the cool, wet summers. You may remember 2007 to 2012 was not a good period. And if you looked at that temperature graph I showed you, it was also a cooler period. It was a small, cool period. But then, of course, it began to win big in the warm summers 2013, there, 2018, another warm summer. And it's also increasing its range. The occupancy is rising. Occupancy is what you get from your casual records, expressed as a percentage. So small whites, again, like the large white, it's increasing 300% in 20 years, I think for the same reason. And the pattern, if you look at the pattern, is very similar. The peaks are the same as large white. The two go side by side. Green vein white, different, totally different from the other two whites. It's in steady decline. Even so, it had its best year for a long time, as you can see here. It wasn't the best in 20 years, but last year it managed to beat its previous lowest. And you might remember me saying 2009 was our worst weather-wise year there. It was worse last year. So the orange tip, again, is increasing. It seems to be a slight climate change winner. It had that dip in there as the others. And then in the good spring, 2019 was an incredibly good year for orange tip, which we've never been able yet to beat. But it is slowly increasing year on year and moving up in altitude. Small skipper. This is some of the bad news, and there are a number of species that are doing badly, but this is a particularly bad one, the small skipper. And we don't really understand the reason. Down 69%. It had a slight recovery this year, but not much. It dips in 2007, 2012 doldrums, which I'll call it from now on. That's the doldrum period. And site numbers, well, if you look back to this period, they used to be in hundreds, and now they're in teens. And the occupancy is falling. So the ones that you're seeing and recording, they're dropping too. Seems to be a big climate change loser. Or is it something more subtle that we don't yet understand? Large skipper is the other way around. It's very slowly going up. It was a good year this year, especially on damp sites. Only damp sites. Dry sites, it didn't do well. It's up 28% on the year. Enjoys damp and it tolerates the cold. The best sites usually have grasses or sedges, lush grasses or sedges, but particularly sedges if it's damp, tend to be the best site. Thorn moors, there are millions of them. Best year 2014 back there. Dingy skipper, it's on the rise, and it's on this very steep rise. It's managed 320% in 10 years. We only have 10 years of record because we didn't have enough transects with dingy skipper before that. A real climate winner. Second best year this year. Duke and Burgundy. It does appear to be on a very slow decline on its main site at Hornby. But of course, with the conservation work that's going on, it's expanding the number of sites. So it's not all bad news. So year by year decline is minus 25%, but actually occupancy is up 120. And that speaks a lot for the conservation that's going on. Its worst year, 2015. So we know about small copper. It's this year better than any other year. It's amazing, really. The difference between there and there is unbelievable. Overall, if you looked at the figures last year, this slope line here was minus 41%, but with this year, it's switched to 6%, just simply because of 1 year. So we were thinking 20 years, oh, it's in decline, but it can switch dramatically. So this is the importance of the long-term records. You never know what's going to happen. You can get a good year anytime. It's a matter of understanding what they really like. And I think with the small copper and the thin sward, of course, you get the heat down in the bottom of the sward where the food plant grows. So it's superheated the leaves. So the caterpillars and the eggs have done really well. The second generation was absolutely huge. It has 3 generations a year. Northern brown argus, one of our rare species, is on the rise. It's up 150% in Yorkshire. I think a lot of that big rise, especially recently, is the switching in how these sites are being managed, particularly on the Craven limestones, and they're being more carefully managed. The sheep, and basically take the sheep off, and you get the rock rose to grow more happily. It does hate the heat. Its best year ever was, guess when? 2024. That horrible year was the best year ever. It's gone down a bit this year, probably go down a bit again, a bit more next year. But again, hats off to our conservation. Even so, the occupancy is down. Brown Argus, this really is a climate change winner. The best year was this last year, beating, you can see it here. So it beat 2023. It's on a very steep curve. Of course, this is a butterfly that only really began to spread at the millennium. It's up 460%. It will continue. And the reason is one of its favorite food plant, dove's foot cranesbill, is now a very significant agricultural weed. It loves to grow in the spray bran around the outside of the crop, where it just gets a touch of weed killer. Of course, all its competitors are knocked out, and this is the species that fills the gap on the edge of the field particularly at the ends of fields where you get the overlap of the spraying. So it really is winning for that reason. Plus, of course, with warming, it's switched food plot. It used to be only on rock rose, but now it quite happily takes grain-bill species. Common blue is a bit of a disaster. You can see it there. If I go back further years, it's even more of a disaster. I mean, I always remember blues were always everywhere. But 2024, lots and lots of sites, it went extinct. In fact, we lost half our sites in 2024. It's unbelievable. But then it recovered in 2025. It is a real problem. All we've done this year is recover back to some figure back 10 years ago. Holly blue, probably one of the biggest of the climate change winners. You can see the figures here. The last peak was huge. That's the dip, which was 2024. This year it's back up, but it's only back up to about average. Even so, it's gone up 300% in 20 years. On average, that's the slope of the line. Green hairstreak had a fantastic year, up 100%, peaking in 2025, the best year. The worst year, 2016. But its occupancy it's decreasing, even though its habitat is being eroded, even though its abundance is seemingly on the rise. Maybe that will change. Certainly, we're seeing more on the lowland. Onto the Venesids, Red Admiral. This is a real big climate change winner, especially in Europe. Europe, it can be in the summer, it can be one of the most common species in Northern Europe. It hit a peak in 23. The previous peak was back in 2017. It recovered a lot, but it was only third best. Obviously, it suffered in the doldrum period, 2007, 2012, those cooler years. It's migrant driven. So some of these spikes are actually more driven by migrants. Tortoiseshell, there's a long story with the tortoiseshell. It's down 22%. It became extinct on a third of our sites in 2024. That cold spring really hammered it badly. It's recovered a little bit in 25, but as I was telling you earlier, it was only one generation. And it's interesting to look now at the figures this last few weeks. We're still seeing good numbers of small tortoiseshell. When did they go into hibernation? I think most of them went into hibernation beginning of last June. It was just a single generation. And it said the weather's not good, it hibernated, and it did not appear at all until this spring. But this is not unusual. If you look at the history, 20-fold ups and downs are really common for this species. The biggest peak of all was 2020, that warm year, but it was also wet during the July period. The worst was our cold year, 2009. So it tends to follow the weather. It hates the heat and it hates the drought. 2022, 23, and 25, it really didn't like. And when this happens, there's no second brood on the lowland. There is in the upper. If you go 100 meters or so up into the hills, then there are quite a few tortoiseshells. Or you move towards the coast, the tortoiseshell returns. So it is a fact in the lowlands of Yorkshire, this is a species that is on the decline. Peacock. If you notice, the peaks of the peacock are the same as the tortoiseshell. They're pretty closely related, but they seem to recover better. So you see a 25% increase over the 20 years. It's a very slow increase. This last year was quite a bit better. Good numbers this spring. I have to say, I've seen about 10 today. I walked my transect today. So it seems to be, it was a strong recovery. and that seems to be continuing, but the pattern is the same. Best year 2019, a year different from the tortoiseshell. Worst again, 2009. It also hates heat and drought, but less so than tortoiseshell. Whoop, comma. So another winner, certainly recently, has been a definite winner. We've had two of the best years ever in the last few years. 2025 was the second best after the big dip last year. All-time record 2023. Similar picture of worst years, and it's a big ups and downs, which is typical of the Venetids. But I think it's not so much to do with drought. This is a species that lays its eggs singly, and it tends to lay in partial shade. And when you think about it, the peacock, also being a much more woodland species, tend to lay its eggs in part shade, while the tortoiseshell always chooses right in the middle of hot sun, as does the red admiral. I think there's some very interesting things we can learn from all that. Let's move on. Small pearl pollard is one of our most important endangered species. I don't have figures for the pearl bordered because there's no transects. It's difficult to make any judgment. But the small pearls are on the decline. This last year was better, much improved. Long term was still down. Worst year, very bad year, 2017. And there's been various peaks along the way, but they tend to be in warm springs. It needs a warm spring for those caterpillars to really survive. If it's not warm, they die out. The next species is even more extreme example of spring weather. This is the dark green, and it's had a series of not so good early springs after the peak 2021 when we had a good spring, 2018, 2019 good springs, and then of course 2025 we had a super spring, and it bounced back. And similarly in other years. So these cold springs bring dips. It's similar to dips in the small pearl, but it's much more exaggerated. Dark green, it's up 25%. That's some improvement over the previous year. But it has become extinct during that big dip there. It became extinct along the limestone ridge. So during this peak period here, it spread right up to near Richmond. And then in last few years, it shrunk back all the way down to Doncaster. After last year, I expect that to again sprint northwards. Hopefully Brocadale will see dark greens return this year. Specklewood is doing well, very, very steady increase. More sites are getting specklewood. Again, this is quite a recent resurgence, particularly after 2010 or thereabouts. It really began to really multiply greatly. It was fairly flat up to that point. And it's roughly the point where the wall disappeared is the point where the specklewoods took off. It's almost literally those two facts are linked. Of course, it also corresponds with warming temperatures. The wall, as I was saying, it declined and then it came back. So last year was a disaster. It lost half of its sites, but they returned of all those sites. We actually got them back on half the sites which were lost. They came back this year, which is good news. We lost 95% of our wall population back in the 90s. So this is most definitely a bit of a recovery happening here. It's a bit up and down, but it is happening. They're definitely becoming more widespread. In fact, you can see here from the occupancy over this period, it's risen 200%. So they're popping up all over the place. It's particularly absent in the warmest part of the Vale of York, the middle of the Vale of York. It vanished for many years, this dip, but it's beginning to come back. Gatekeeper, one of the big winners, 100% in 20 years. But just look at some of these peaks. We've had three of its highest years in the literally last 3 years. It did decline somewhat in the doldrum years, hit a low spot and then has increased since. So again, this is looking mostly like temperature. However, it seems to have a bit of an obstacle. It just can't get over. It's coming up from through the Vale of York, but it can't get to the east of it because of the Howardian Hills. It doesn't really occur much north of the Howardians, and can only really reach up the Vale of York. Once you get more than 100 meters or so up the valleys of the hills, then it tends to disappear. Meadow brown, again, it's increasing. Another winner is up 60%. And the ringlet enjoys the wet as much as it enjoys the warmth. So if you get the two together, it's quite a good combination. Unfortunately, these last few years, it's either been very hot and often very dry at the same time, which is not good. But whatever is good for the ringlet tends to be bad for the meadow brown and the other way around. So what you tend to find these two species literally up and down opposite to each other. Small heath, one of the species which we're really worried about because it is in long-term decline. And that continues. And we've had some really miserable years because of the drought. It likes the damp. And now we've had 4 years of really horrible cold and drought. And so we've really reached the low point 2025. It's not good news. I want to show you another little graph, another table here. Mind blown to begin with, but don't worry, I'll break it down. So this is the abundance trend. Most of these figures are from the graphs that you've just seen. And what I do here is compare the Yorkshire trend with the UK trend. And you see how close it is. Although there tends to be more species on the UK trends at this bottom end of the scale, which you could imagine because it's warmer. So these are, I would imagine that these species here will generally tend to go negative, and it will be largely driven by drought, probably. But you can see the list there. If you then look at the best years, and just where does 25 and 24 actually fit into this? So this is a really good year, 2025, and you can see this is the Yorkshire best and the second best, because we had 7 species had their best year and 9 had their second best year. This is the UK best, and you notice 2023 figures a lot in these. If you look down these lists, you'll see 2023 is almost everywhere. It's just interesting to compare how similar, but we are behind the trend for the whole UK. That drought and heat is coming up. At the same time, these here are sprinting ahead. If you look at then the worst, again, it's very similar. And it tends to be the worst, the poorer performing species did the worst in 2024. And pretty similar between York and the UK. Right, I've drowned you with numbers. Now we're on to something a little bit different. New species to look out for. Large tortoiseshell. It's a really interesting species, this. So it's official. It's no longer extinct. It went extinct in the 1950s. After that cool spell I told you about in the first graph, and combine that with Dutch elm disease, of course, it was a bad combination. It's now not uncommon species along the southwest coast, the south coast from Kent to Cornwall. And In Holland, it's actually overtaking the small tortoiseshell. It doesn't suffer with the drought. That's the species. It's found in woods and along hedgerows where there's scattered sallow and wych elm. I was walking down Pocklington Canal. I don't know if anybody knows. There's the by the side of the canal pathway, and this big orange butterfly, and I only ever saw it flying at great speed. So all I can tell you is very large and a dull orange color. It was like not like anything I've seen ever before. It was last year, and opposite where I saw it, there are a number of elm trees and an awful lot of sallow. Um, was it? I don't know. And unless it lands, I've got really no way of telling. Although in flight, it is different from the tortoiseshell, the small tortoiseshell, because the large tortoiseshell is more a dull orange, while the small tortoiseshell is more reddish orange. So you see them this last month. They're beginning to peter out now. You tend to find them on sallow bushes in woodlands and hedgerows. It breeds on elms. It makes a web. It emerges then in July. So that's the 2 times to look for it. So the ID tips, which might interest you, it's a much larger butterfly than the small tortoiseshell. Males are patrolling. They tend to go very fast, backwards and forwards, which is exactly what I saw in Pocklington. In flight, it's a very dull shade of orange, rather than the red-orange of small tortoiseshell. The next thing to look for, if it lands, is these 4 spots. Small tortoiseshell just has these 2. Whoops. Whoops. While large tortoiseshell has these 2 spots here. You ought to notice here, this is orange, not black. So the small tortoiseshell has a large black area here. The small tortoiseshell also has very pronounced blue crescents along its outer edge, which the large tortoiseshell lacks. Also, the small tortoiseshell, these marks here are almost white, while in this large they're yellow-ish or cream. So my tip is, if you see one, and I've given you all the clues, follow it. I didn't have the chance. It just vanished over the top of a tree. I think you could be surprised. I think it's already in Yorkshire. We've had cases over previous years of it being seen, particularly in the spring, but also in the summer, but mostly in the spring. There's been a hell of a emergence, I think, in Kent this year. Blean Woods, they've had dozens. And in fact, hundreds of people have been down there to visit and see them. The next one to watch out for is the southern small white. It's a butterfly associated with gardens and allotments, but it also tends to be a coastal and rocky wasteland. Its food plants are candytuft and war, sometimes known as wild rocket. Both species pretty common in UK. Wild rocket is grown in allotments, and of course our candytuft in gardens. This is what it looks like. This is the spring brood, which is around about now. It's very lightly marked here. Number 1, this dark dusting on the spring brood, only the spring brood, with darkish scales. The apical patch is large, that's this bit, and extends a third the way down and roughly a third the way along the wing margin. As far as the discal spot, which is this one here, number 3. This is the one that most people talk about. Some people call the southern small white the square spot white because of the squareness and largeness of this site. It's the most pronounced feature. Sometimes there's an additional spot in the middle of the hindwings, often just a smudge. The other factor, number 5, is this roundness. It's very round. The small round-winged butterfly is the other way some people talk about it. This is the summer form. Bit different. Everything's a bit darker. Those black scales have almost disappeared. So it has 3 broods. Second brood's June, July. The late brood's August, September. The markings are darker in the summer and the autumn, and much more extensive than the small white. So in other words, it goes round the corner, and you've got this big square spot, which is often concave on its outer surface. Sometimes it's large enough it spills over the veins into the next sector. So my tips is smaller than the small white. The jizz, how it flies, is very much more wood white with a very low, slow, dainty flight. If anybody has seen a wood white, they will know exactly what I'm talking about. It's also got the more rounded wings of the wood white. And of course, you can pick up the prominent square spot, which tends to catch your attention. Get it to land and get yourself a photo. That will help enormously. But you can imagine there's so many whites with similar markings to this, especially the green vein white. It's tricky. These marks vary with season, but between individuals enormously. There's only one true way to be sure that it is a southern small white, and that's actually find an egg. So if you can find the food plant close by, in this case it's sat on one of them. This is a new food plant for it. This is garlic mustard. This over here tells you some of the history. So it reached Switzerland in 2008 and Holland in 2015. It's spreading at 70 kilometers per year. It's not common. So of all the whites, it's only about 1% of the whites. In Germany, it did something different. It actually started using garlic mustard. It's becoming less fussy and it's becoming more fecund, more breeding faster. So it's definitely one to be looking out for. This year, there was one on the Suffolk coast confirmed as definite and another one in Durham, which I would be suspicious about. But I was sent a picture of one from the Spirin Peninsula, which would be a classic place you would see a migrant. And it had everything right, everything else per year. It was the summer generation, it was the end of August, and it was a spitting image of this one. Obviously, we didn't have any, we couldn't raise the caterpillars because if it's a 1 or 2 instar larvae, it has a black head, while small whites are green. The most likely time you're going to see it is August, September, because it is so mobile. It moves about all over the place. So that's time to see it. So just to round up, this is a good example of how the whites vary. So we know it's all to do with the corners with the whites. If you're IDing whites, this is what I train my volunteers to learn. Large white, it goes right down the far side. It's very black and it goes well past the dot. Southern small white, it stops at the discal spot and it's straight across. That is one of its characteristics. It's large, it's square, and it's concave. It's not always the case. Each one will be different. Sometimes it's just a smudge. Sometimes it's much rounder. This is a chosen photo to illustrate for these purposes. Small white, it's above the line. And the green vein goes past the discal spot. And each of these lines coming in, as you know, tends to be pulled in from the side, and they're broken. While on the southern small white, it's not like that. It's more a continuous line. Buzz wild rocket, if you come across it, it's a typical plant you find on, well, it's also called the wall rocket. It tends to grow out of walls, yellow flowers. That's a typical example. So it loves dry places. Arugula, which is wild arugula, which is wild rocket, looks like that. And then one you get in on your pizza tends to be that one, which is the common rocket. It does not use that. All I can say is both are great on pizza. In fact, the wild arugula is really spicy. And the third one, the reason for mentioning this one is we had 4 cases this summer. Now, we've never had that before. We only had one in 2022. And rumours of previous ones dating back to 2016. But this time we got pictures, 2 of which were on Buddleia. And this is a species of butterfly that does not, or very rarely, use flowers for nectar. So then you begin to think, are we really missing this species? The fact that people are seeing it because it's on a flower, you might expect, but there must be many more that people are not picking up on. So it tends to be a butterfly of heavy clay, wet old woodlands with oak and sallow. If you're not familiar with sallow, there's a little example later. It's rapidly spreading north. We have good potential sites. Potterick Car would be a good one. Sprockler Flash, where one was seen this year on Buddleia. Crazy. Another one was seen up in near Durham. Sorry, this side of Durham. Trying to remember the name of the wood. In fact, there was 2 seen there on the Cleveland, just on the edge of the Cleveland Hills, and one of them was on Buddleia. The other good site you might consider, Maltby Common, where they have been seen twice before, dating back to 2017. And that is close to one of their strongholds, which is just over the border of Yorkshire, the forests of not, gosh, forget the name of the forest. Just over the border into Nottinghamshire, where they are incredibly common. In fact, it's one of the strongest colonies in the UK is in the forest. So in 2025, 4 were seen. This is the food plant. This is the goat willow, otherwise known as sallow. It has the wide leaves and this downy appearance, which is typical goat willow. It's variable. That compares with the grey willow. Now, the butterfly will use both, but it much prefers the goat willow. In reality, these 2 species of willow actually hybridize. So you get anything from narrow leaves to wide leaves. The butterfly uses both of them, preferring these wide leaf species or hybrids. My tip for knowing your way around a purple emperor, which has always served me really well, is the timetable. So males tend to emerge in mid-July and become active around about 8 o'clock. So it can be quite cool, down at 12 to 15 degrees centigrade. And you'll find them down on the forest path, where they tend to be very docile. They won't move very much, and they tend to be taking liquids like this female in the picture above. From 9 to 10 o'clock, they tend to be much more flying rapidly up and down the lines of sallow bushes, basically trying to flush out females, because this is the beginning of the flight season. So they're all about finding the females. But by 11 o'clock, they tend to take up their perches up on the master trees. Often it's the most prominent trees in the wood from which they can intercept anything they can see that flies. They hope for a female, but a red kite. They have no, they are incredibly aggressive creatures. Spend more time beating each other up than beating up finding females. That's my tips. After the first week or so, then they tend to go from a quick hunt early in the morning. They go straight up into the tops of trees. And of course, you don't see them. So your best chance of seeing one in realism is that early morning period. I would say 9 o'clock's about optimum. And you can literally walk down the path and pick them up on your hand. It's amazing. They're very docile. So that's the end of my talk, and I'm very free to take questions. If you've had the
Thank,
chance, have we got any questions?
thank you, Nick. If anybody does have a question for Nick, please can you use the chat button at the bottom of your screen? Um, Make sure you write your question in the chat button, please. Gabby, I think if you can write it in, that'd be good. Anybody got any questions for Nick?
Blimey.
Check that we've got the chat open. Yeah, chat's on. So, got any questions? So, Nick, from what you're seeing this year, what are your initial thoughts? Are you thinking we're going to be seeing a similar year to last year if the weather
Mhm.
continues to be?
If we get a good spring, anything could happen, in my view. Literally anything could happen. It's looking good presently. Um, the fact that it's almost as early as last year, which was exceptional, is a good start. Obviously, we're just looking at the hibernators. We only had a few other species emerge, but I'm seeing plenty peacock, comma, very few red admirals, by the way. They didn't seem to
Yeah, I've seen a
survive.
couple. Yeah,
Yeah, I've only seen it. I haven't seen any in actual fact. Um, but loads of brimstones, loads of commas, loads of peacocks, and loads of tortoiseshells. That's the current situation. Most numerous, probably the peacock.
yeah. I don't know whether
It's,
we're having a problem with the chat thing. There's nothing in there at all at the moment. I've checked it's open and available for people to use.
I think if you got a warm spring now for the rest of April, and we have a decent May, then it could be a really cracking season.
Yeah,
It could, but no doubt it will go wrong. Last year was exceptional. You don't often get years like that. As you could see from those graphs, it was just continuous good weather. There wasn't hardly a day where you didn't have
no,
flight conditions. I can't remember any year like that.
no. The chat seems to be open according to the settings on here, but I'm not getting in. There's nobody putting anything in. Can somebody try putting something in the chat? I just want to see whether it's working or not. All right, here we are. We've got some there.
Oh yeah, here we go.
Somebody asked if you'd mentioned marbled white, Nick.
I must have probably, I may have missed it. If I did, I apologize. I may have missed it. The reason it's not on all the graphs is we only have about, because we only have a very few sites on the Wolds, we've not really got a lot of data going back
Mm.
for the 20 years. In fact, we tend to run out, don't even have 10 years data. We only have about 5 or 6 years data. Hence the big push to get more sites up and running, especially on the Wolds, which we've now succeeded to some extent. If you look at the figures for this last year, it was a little bit down. So I think you saw from the graphic there, It's sort of nearly on average this year, while previously it was quite good. I think 2019 is still the peak for the marble whites so far, but we don't have historic records. We need the coverage.
Can you see Julia's question, Nick, about transect walks?
Uh, oh, Julie, here we go. Yeah, Julie's one of our walkers. Ah, yes. Okay. Yeah, I've been asked this question today. Everybody's worried about the weather because tomorrow's going to be a super day and then Wednesday's going to be a super day. But the Transect week finishes on Tuesday night. And she wants to know, can you walk Tuesday? Yes. And can you walk Wednesday? Yes, Julie. You can do it that way. You then covered. If you get another good day within the next week, of course, you could do your transect again if you really want to. Very few people do because it's a lot of work. Um, yeah, it's difficult to predict the weather. We've had a long run of horrible weather. In fact, we've only had flight days. We've only had what 4 or 5 flight days really, where we've had some hours of good weather. And today was one of them. I managed to walk one of my transects.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah,
So the chat does seem to be working. So if
yeah.
people have any other questions, then please could you input?
I'd love to know everybody's view about last year. Do they actually think it was good?
I certainly did, Nick. I mean, the number of butterflies I saw. So for people who aren't aware, I live at the top end of Yorkshire, just top end of the North York Moors, and we had enormous numbers of whites, particularly. I mean, just everywhere. But yeah, good year for everything. Very good year for purple emperor, purple hair streaks around by us in all
It
the oak
it
trees.
was. It was. I got a phone call. Got a call on WhatsApp from a lady, just a few villages from us, saying, Nick, there's a large number of something flying around my tree, and it's 7 o'clock in the evening. Are they moths or are they butterflies? So I was fortunately able to answer that one.
Yeah,
They were purple hair streaks, which is what they do. There was a lot of swarming behavior in 2025, um, and a lot of spread of species.
yeah. I mean, certainly around here, every single oak tree we had around here had numerous purple hair streaks in them.
Yeah,
Every single one
yeah,
around the record. So it looks
yeah.
like you might have a new translate walker here, Nick. Lucy
Uh,
Jackson said, they'll
yes,
contact
Lucy.
to get involved.
Contact me, Lucy. If you go to the website, Yorkshire Butterflies, just tap it in on Google, you'll find it, and you'll find my name under the contacts, or any of the addresses for Yorkshire Butterflies. They will reach me. So please get in contact. Whereabouts are you, Lucy? You answering?
Lucy, you able to give Nick an idea of roughly where you are? All right.
Oh, hang
She's
on.
in Leeds. Yeah.
Oh, you're in Leeds. Okay. Well, that'll be interesting. As you know, there's the Wild Spaces project in Leeds, Lucy, where you could get involved. Have a look on our website. You'll see lots of links for volunteering, and there will be some transect work. We have a transect at Roundhay and others to the south of the city. And I'm presently looking for somebody to for North Leeds.
It looks like Lucy's already been volunteering in the last week and
Oh,
going again tomorrow.
going
So
tomorrow.
yeah,
Good. Well
enjoy the
done, Lucy.
weather.
Yeah, indeed. It will be a cracking day tomorrow.
Okay, we got any other questions for Nick before I switch off the recording?
Jerry Risby, Upper Usborne. Doesn't matter, Jerry. If you can be organized by mid-April, and if there's anything you need a hand with, please get in contact with me. Um, but yeah, you'll find it either on our website or you go to ukbms.org and you'll find all the information you need. First thing to do is get yourself a route together if that hasn't already been agreed. What you're looking for really is a range of habitats when you're designing a new transect. So make sure you cover grasslands and woodlands and everything in between.
I think you can point in Nick as well, Jerry. There's a really good video on the Branch YouTube channel on transect setting up, isn't there, Nick? So
There is lots of uh, and you'll find them linked in the website. So if you go
yeah,
to the web page Becoming a Transect Walker, it walks you through the whole thing. We'd like also for our surveyors to get more involved with moths. Most of them find it fairly tough with the whites and skippers to do the identification, but we really would like people to get involved um, with stage flying moths. Julie Mason. Okay, thank you, Julie. It's a lot
you
of
see
hard work.
Julia's
It is a lot of
piece
work.
above there about more Purple Hair Street monitoring.
Yep, we only got one at the moment, which is just in Potterick. We could do with some more. Um, you'll find links on the UK BMS site on how it's done. You go basically it's five. You pinpoint 5 trees. You go out between 5 and 6 p.m. in the evening and look up for about a minute at the tops of the trees and surroundings, and you count everything you can see. It's a simple way of doing it. So it takes about 20 minutes, and you just got to pinpoint 6 prominent, well-lit oak trees.
Nick, do we have a link on our website to that? It might be
No,
worth putting some.
no, you have to go to UKBMS.
Oh, do you? Okay, right. No, I'm just thinking on our website to UK BMS, that's all.
No, I haven't had time to do it. It's
No.
only been it's only been going for a couple of years
Oh, has it? Okay, right. It was
because
new to me, I wasn't.
transects are not very good at picking them up because they are up in the tops
Yeah,
of trees.
yeah, you're not looking up there, are
You're
you?
not looking there. Um, uh, those people know trees on their transect. I know I do. I come to a known tree, I tend to just stop for a few seconds and look up, and I'm quite lucky if I get one. But you've got to be
And of course,
consistent.
the timing's different as well, isn't it? When they're most populous is typically in the
Yes,
evenings when.
I mean you do see them all the way through the
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
through the day. Yeah, especially if it's been stinking hot, they'll actually come down
Yes.
and sit on the ground and expire on the and take moisture from the soil.
Okay, Julia said she's got a number of old oak trees on her
Yeah,
transect.
it'd be a
So,
good one. It'd be a good one, Julie. Yeah,
yeah.
that'd be a good addition.
Good. Well, if there's nothing else, if anybody's got any more questions, I'm going to stop the record button now, Nick.
Thank you. Oop, there's another
Oh,
one. Do you remember the name?
Sherwood Forest.
Sherwood Forest. Sorry. Yeah. Wellow Wood is the one to go for. Just south of my, my memory's gone. You'll find it. Just put in Wellow Park Wood, and that is the place to be in the middle